Karen, the domineering HOA president, tried to strip a man of his own right to use the street his family had owned for decades. Her arrogance and constant threats turned the neighborhood into her personal kingdom, leaving everyone else silent out of fear. But when he revealed the documents proving the entire road was legally his, the balance of power shifted in an instant. And just wait until you hear how this shocking turn shattered her rule and proved that justice always finds its way. I've always thought of my neighborhood as the kind of place where nothing extraordinary ever happens. You know the type. Kids riding bikes in the afternoons, neighbors waving as they bring in groceries, the occasional barbecue smoke drifting through the air on weekends. I grew up here, and even after so many years, there was still a certain comfort in knowing the rhythm of this street. It wasn't just any street, though. Hidden beneath the ordinary surface was an unusual fact. This stretch of road legally belonged to me. My grandfather purchased it decades ago when the city decided to close it off, and the ownership quietly passed down through the family. Most of the time, I didn't even think about it. To everyone else, it was just another suburban road. That Monday morning started off as usual. The sun was barely above the rooftops, painting long shadows across the pavement. I grabbed my coffee, locked the front door, and headed toward my car. My mind was already drifting toward the day ahead. Emails, deadlines, the usual grind. But then I stopped. Something was wrong. Right there in front of my driveway was a massive SUV, not just parked, but angled in a way that completely blocked me from leaving. My first reaction was confusion. Maybe a neighbor had a delivery. Maybe someone parked here by mistake. But then I saw her. Leaning casually against the hood, as if it were a throne, was Karen. If you've ever had one of those neighbors who seems to think the world spins around them, you'll understand exactly the type of person I'm talking about. She wasn't just any resident. She was the president of our HOA, and she carried that title like a crown. Rules were her weapon of choice, and she wielded them with absolute confidence. I froze for a moment, unsure how to process what I was seeing. Karen looked directly at me, and instead of apologizing for blocking my driveway, she lifted her hand in a slow, deliberate gesture, a signal for me to stop. Her lips curved into a cold smile, the kind that told me this wasn't an accident. She had planned this. "You can't park on the street anymore," she said flatly. "The HOA voted." Her words hit harder than I expected. For a split second, I wondered if I had misheard. Could she really be serious? She wasn't just making a suggestion. She was declaring it as law, as if her personal vote suddenly overruled everyone else's rights. My driveway, my street, the ground my grandfather had legally secured for our family. She was cutting me off from it as if it were hers to control. A rush of disbelief shot through me. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but the weight of her stare and the confidence in her voice left me stunned. My keys hung loosely in my hand, my coffee cooling fast, and for the first time in years, I felt powerless in front of my own home. It wasn't just a blocked driveway. It was a challenge. And though I didn't know it yet, that moment was the spark that would turn a quiet street into the stage for a battle I never asked for, but one I was ready to fight. The thing about Karen is that her actions were never about fairness or protecting the neighborhood. They were about control. She thrived on it. She wanted everyone to believe that life on this street only ran smoothly because she dictated the rules. Deep down, I knew why she singled me out. My family had lived here longer than anyone else, and unlike the newer residents, we never had to ask for permission for every minor detail. That independence was something she couldn't stand. To her, it wasn't just nonconformity. It was defiance. Karen had always carried herself as if she were the queen of the neighborhood. She strutted around with a clipboard in one hand and her phone in the other, always ready to remind someone of a regulation, whether it was about the height of their grass, the color of their shutters, or the placement of a garbage can. She spoke to people not as neighbors but as subordinates, and most of them went along with it, not because they respected her, but because they feared her sharp tongue and relentless persistence. The very next day, she made her move again. I walked outside ready to head to work, and there it was, her SUV, parked deliberately sideways across my driveway. This wasn't carelessness. This was strategy. She wanted to send a message not only to me but to everyone watching, and she made sure there was an audience. Several neighbors stood nearby, chatting nervously, trying not to meet my eyes. Karen, with her voice raised just enough for everyone to hear, announced, "This guy is breaking the rules. He thinks he doesn't have to follow what the rest of us agreed on." A couple of heads nodded, though reluctantly, but most stayed silent, their faces tense. They didn't believe her, not really, but silence was easier than becoming her next target. That silence stung almost as much as her words. I clenched my fists in my pockets, forcing myself to stay calm, but my resentment was growing by the second. It wasn't just the inconvenience of being blocked in. It was the humiliation of being falsely accused in front of my neighbors, people I had known for years. Karen was twisting reality to make me look like the problem, when she was the one staging this entire scene. Later that day, as I was passing by the corner of the block, I overheard her whispering to another board member. Her voice was low, but her words carried enough venom to pierce through me. "If he doesn't comply," she said, "we'll fine him. I'll make sure he regrets ever moving here." Something inside me snapped. It wasn't fear and it wasn't shock anymore. It was pure, simmering hatred. She wasn't just targeting me. She was setting an example. This was how she treated anyone who dared to stand up to her authority. Through intimidation, humiliation, and the constant threat of punishment. I walked away from that conversation with my jaw tight and my heart pounding. I knew then that this wasn't just a petty neighborhood dispute. This was a battle, and Karen had just made it personal. There comes a point when silence turns into surrender, and I wasn't about to surrender my own home, my own rights, or my family's history. For days I had endured Karen's petty displays of authority, her whispers, her accusations, her endless attempts to twist the truth. But deep inside me, something shifted. I wasn't shocked anymore, and I wasn't just resentful. I was angry. A kind of anger that demanded action, not words. That night, I went up into the attic and pulled out a dusty metal box. Inside were the documents my grandfather had kept safe for decades. Original deeds, signed contracts, and notarized agreements with the city. Page after page, the story was the same. The entire road in front of my house, the same street Karen believed the HOA owned, legally belonged to my family. Every inch of pavement, every curb, and yes, even the exact spot where Karen loved to park her SUV was private property. Ours. Holding those papers in my hands was like holding a weapon, not of violence, but of truth. I didn't need to argue with Karen anymore. I didn't need to raise my voice in private or whisper my frustrations to sympathetic neighbors. The law was already on my side. All I had to do was let it speak for me. The very next morning, when I walked outside and saw her SUV sitting smugly across my driveway again, I didn't hesitate. I made 2 calls, one to a tow company, the other to the police. I explained the situation, provided the documents, and waited. When the tow truck rumbled down the street, its engine echoing like a promise, I stepped onto my porch. A few neighbors peeked from their windows, drawn by the noise. The driver hooked chains under Karen's massive SUV and began lifting it. That was when the front door of her house slammed open. Karen stormed out, her face flushed, her voice sharp enough to cut through the air. "You can't do this!" she screamed, marching down her walkway. "This is HOA property! You have no right!" Her performance might have worked on a nervous neighbor, but this time I was ready. Calmly, I handed the officer my stack of documents. He flipped through them with professional efficiency. After a few moments, he gave a small nod, then looked at Karen with a steady gaze. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "this is private property. You parked illegally. The tow is lawful." For the first time, Karen's confidence cracked. The fury in her eyes was undeniable, but underneath it, I could see something else. Fear. That was when I let my own anger out. Not the kind that blinds you, but the kind that clears the air. I raised my voice so the entire block could hear. "Karen, this is my street. My family bought it. We own it. And I decide who parks here. Not you. Not the HOA. Me." The words echoed down the block, and for once nobody stayed silent. A few neighbors even nodded. The truth was finally out, and it didn't need defending anymore. Karen could shout all she wanted. The law was on my side, and my anger had finally broken free. For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then it broke. Not with Karen's voice, but with laughter. Neighbors chuckled, some openly, some trying to hide it behind their hands. An older gentleman at the corner of the street even clapped, the sound echoing like a verdict. Karen's face flushed, and she tried to fire back, words tumbling from her lips, but her voice was drowned out. The sight of her beloved SUV being hauled away under police approval was too powerful. No one could unsee it, and no one was taking her side anymore. That night, the neighborhood felt different. Windows glowed a little brighter, conversations grew a little bolder. People who had once kept quiet now whispered freely. For so long, Karen's shadow had stretched across our block, and suddenly it was gone, replaced by the image of her defeat. A week later, the HOA was not the iron-fisted machine it had once been. For the first time in years, neighbors began to speak about change. At backyard gatherings and driveway chats, I overheard quiet but determined conversations. Maybe it's time we vote her out. Maybe someone else should lead. Enough is enough. Karen tried to save face. She walked the neighborhood with forced smiles, speaking louder than necessary, pretending as if nothing had changed. But the silence that once followed her was gone. People no longer nodded automatically at her words. They remembered too clearly the moment her SUV swung helplessly in the air, chains rattling, while the officer declared the truth. Her authority had cracked, and the sound of that brake still lingered. For me, satisfaction didn't come in a single flash of victory. It arrived every morning, slow and steady, like sunlight filling a room. Each time I pulled out of my driveway, the road stretched before me, clear and unobstructed. No SUVs blocking the path, no arrogant figure wagging a finger, just open space, mine by right, mine by history. And each time I turned the wheel, I felt a grin forming, one I could barely suppress. The sweetest part of all was knowing I hadn't beaten her with force or intimidation. I hadn't lowered myself to her level. I used the very weapon she loved to wield, the rules. She spent years twisting them to her advantage, trying to trap others with fine print and technicalities. But when the moment came, it was the law itself, clear and undeniable, that left her powerless. That was the true satisfaction, not only regaining my peace, but watching her empire collapse under the weight of her own obsession. She built her identity on control, yet in the end, it was control she lost. Now, when I drive down my street, I don't just see pavement. I see a story etched into every crack and curb, a reminder that fairness, once claimed and defended, shines brighter than fear. And though I don't say it out loud, deep down I know the truth. Karen's reign is over, and justice is mine.